intuition speaks to us, but we're not always ready to act on our intuitions. And it's okay, it's okay. Recognize it and then observe yourself. If you wake up one day and you feel like you actually have the willingness to take the risk or to follow through with courage to do what your intuition is telling you, your deeper self is telling you, then it's time to act on it.
And who knows, by the end of today's episode, you just might end up acting on that voice that is speaking to you, telling you to book that plane ticket, reassess that relationship, take that career break, start that location-independent business, perhaps something else. I guess we'll find out. That is today's guest, Hrund Gunnsteinsdóttir, author of Innsæi, Heal, Revive, and Reset with the Icelandic Art of Intuition. She walked away from her dream career in the UN to follow a deeper calling, and in this conversation, she shares the story behind her journey and the practical advice that you need to make better decisions using your intuition and this Icelandic concept of Innsæi as a guide, which we're going to talk about. You're going to discover why your intuition possesses perhaps far more information than your analytical mind and how to begin tapping into that, simple techniques to distinguish your inner guidance from fears, biases, and wishful thinking, a specific breathing technique to calm your nervous system before important decisions, and loads more. If your intuition's been screaming at you about something, or maybe it feels like it's just been trying to break through, but you're having trouble tuning in, I hope this episode will help you out because it could be a game changer. You never know. Tune in to find out. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with travel, this topic of intuition? For me, everything in many ways. I mean, my intuition led me out on the road the first time in my own personal journey and really kept me traveling when I saw those around me as I was living this nomadic lifestyle before that was even really a thing. And all my friends were getting these, up the career ladder and these full-time jobs and prestigious titles and all this. And I'm thinking, what am I doing over here? I'm just working these road jobs and, am I going anywhere in life? Starting to question my decisions, my practical mind kind of sneaking in every now and again. But my intuition always pulled me back to travel. I just said, no, I love this travel thing. I'm just going to keep going and it's going to lead me somewhere. And ultimately led to this podcast, my life abroad, and all sorts of other things in life. That's a whole other episode. The point is, your intuition can sometimes be easy to listen to, and sometimes it can be hard to listen to, especially when the external noise is getting louder than the internal noise. It's kind of drowning it out, if you will, which can happen a lot in today's society. Anyway, we're going to talk about intuition today, and I hope coming out of this one, it at least sparks one or two ideas, or perhaps gives you some practical tools to tune in a bit more. I go up and down with being able to tune into my intuition, and my practical mind gets in the way like everybody else. And I really am trying to use this episode as an excuse to get back to being guided in more ways than one. And that means incorporating that intuition into my decision making, into my practical decisions. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to bring you this episode. Stick around on the back end. I will share a bit about the biggest fight within, where it often takes place, and how to resolve it once and for all. I'm sure it's something you already know from experience, but worth a reminder coming out of this one. Plus, a big announcement, a bit of a sneak peek of what's coming your way here on the pod. By the way, Hrund, our guest today, has a course about intuition. It's the signature Innsæi course. We'll link up to that in the show notes. and we'll link up to her book as well. Here's my conversation with Hrund. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Hrund Gunnsteinsdóttir, author of Innsæi, Heal, Revive, and Reset with the Icelandic Art of Intuition. There are a myriad of reasons why I'm excited to talk about this topic of intuition today. But I want to hear about your 3 homes first. This is a travel podcast, so we'll talk a little travel. And yeah, so you're based in Berlin, but then you're from Iceland. So
yeah, so about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, I left my full-time job leading the Sustainability Center in Iceland, and I was also a board member of Iceland's biggest investment fund. These were both amazing jobs, and I really enjoyed them and the people I was working with. But I had decided to publish my book. Obviously, I was writing it, and so it was published. Exactly, it was published early in 2024 with One Year Books.
Yeah,
I wrote it in English, and to cut a long story short, I left my jobs in Iceland. I did that in good preparation because I took the decision this time I'm going to give Innsæi all I've got. And so I sold my house in Iceland.
Wow.
I moved to mainland Europe and chose Berlin because of love. Life isn't that complicated at the end of the day. And I just had my fingers crossed, taking this leap of faith, thinking, I hope my book will be published in more languages and around the world. And in the first week when I come to Berlin, I received the first email from my original publisher saying, we've just sold the rights to Germany to no other than Rowold. And since then, we've been, and my publisher has been able to sell the rights to publishers in all continents in the world. And I'm just really enjoying this incredible journey. But what happens as a result, because you mentioned 3 homes, is I have 2 daughters. I recently started a new relationship about a little over 3 years ago. And so, when you decide to just, I sold my house. I gave away almost everything I owned in terms of, sofa, chairs, whatever people need for their homes. And my 2 daughters, they were very open to coming and staying in Berlin as well. But then that changed. So they are now, they came and went, but now they're both in Iceland finishing their schools, which meant that I decided to buy an apartment in Reykjavik at the end of last year. My partner has a house in the countryside in Germany, which is absolutely beautiful. It's like a sustainable, we grow roses and fruits and vegetables and tend bees and stuff like that. So at the moment I'm between 3 homes. But we will be simmering down to 2 homes, and then we'll just play it by ear. It's a transition for more people than just me.
Yeah, incredible. So I would say really walking the walk in terms of following your intuition. Well, this is part of the conversation we're going to have today. I want people to hear a little bit more about your personal story because it's so compelling. And I think what you just mentioned really ties in with a partial theme of your life, which is kind of stripping away the identity of, a job or a home or, just really letting go of certain things that you may have incorporated as part of your identity and kind of moving through that and leaning on intuition to kind of help you move through that in some ways. So, this example you use is like, it doesn't sound surprising to me because of some of the things you've left in the past. And I'm bringing this up because, people listening, when you want to build a life of travel, there's a common theme in this show that I've noticed several, but over, hundreds of episodes that we've done. And one of them is, the journey before the journey, the time that you're kind of in the decision-making process of trying to figure out, okay, let's say you want to travel for a year or you want to travel for a summer or you want to become a nomad. All of that really just ties into like changing your life around, right? And in order to do that, you're probably going to have to let some things go and you're going to have to make some hard decisions that your practical mind might not necessarily be vibing with. You know what I mean? It's like, well, why would you leave this stable job? You can't just go and travel for a year. And even though inside your soul's like, I got to do this thing. And so, that balance, and we're going to talk about that today. And for your personal story, I kind of wanted to start there because you kind of went through this, I would say, the first time. I don't know if it was the first time for you, if you would define that, but when you were working for the UN and, you had this job and you eventually started realizing, and I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but I thought this was pretty powerful, that you were stuck in a job that you were working more for the system than the people that the system was designed to help in some ways. And that was sort of like a alarm bell started going off for you in some ways around that. So yeah, can you talk about a little bit about your personal story and how you were able to, like, what advice would you have for anybody listening that is in some kind of situation where it's like, well, this is like, it's like the golden handcuffs thing. Like, this is too good to be, I got to build this career, whether it's a career, relationship, living situation, whatever. I would just love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. And much of the things that you said, you just say so eloquently. Like, I couldn't explain it better. And also with the identity and peeling off external things that don't really define us, right? And just to try to show up without feathers and all, But so I was in my 20s when I was offered these amazing opportunities that were really part of my dream jobs and my dream of how I wanted to fulfill my sense of purpose and live my life. And I was first offered a position in Kosovo after the war. It was just after the war. And I'm 26 when I moved to Kosovo, and I become the program manager for a small UN agency. And this is the first time that the agency is working in post-conflict reconstruction. I'm working very closely with local people, which was an incredible gift. And it really had a big impact on me. And it was really how I wanted to work, because when you work for an international organization in an area like this, you are often working with other internationals, and you can be relatively remote from life on the ground. But I was working in close relationship with people who lived in Kosovo and aspired to build a peaceful, democratic future and with human rights and gender equality. And I came to Kosovo, and it just felt like walking into an open wound. And I just really felt this deep sense of wanting to give it all I had. And at this time, my intuition was, when I think back, it was actually relatively good when it comes to like how I worked and navigated. And we were able to, do lots of amazing things. But personally, my connection with myself and my intuition, when it came to the boundaries I needed to set for myself, my ability to recharge my batteries and stuff, was just almost non-existent. So what happened in Kosovo was that I absolutely exerted my limitations. And, I started waking up in the middle of the night thinking there were bugs crawling over my body, and I go through some really difficult physical trials while I was there. And then when I'm in Kosovo, I had previously taken an international competitive examination to become a permanent staff member of the UN, which was absolutely my dream job. And there's a very small proportion of people who actually get that invitation. And I ended up getting that invitation while I was in Kosovo. My first job would be in Geneva, Switzerland. And I moved to Geneva, and I start my career working for the UN until I would retire. So that's the mindset I'm in. And I'm like, this is incredible.
Yeah, you've got your dream job. You're like, well, why would I ever leave it?
Exactly. It was absolutely my dream job. And when I consulted with people who are older and more experienced in the UN and EU context in Kosovo, they would say, like, that's incredible. We call people like you the golden goats, because there's like such a small percentage of people who get that contract. It's always like 2 or 3 years at a time that you are hired with the UN. Anyway, so I moved to Geneva and loved the natural landscapes and the Alps and skiing and hiking. But working for the UN was like just walking into this incredible, heavy, bureaucratic, hierarchical institute. And I could feel my drive, and at the time I would literally think about the sparkle in my eye. I was just looking at a sparkle in people's eyes because I could just feel the energy waning in there. Because it's such a heavy system, and I felt we were really disconnected from the real world and people and the planet. And I just felt like we were working really hard to serve a system instead of people and the planet. There has to be a balance, right? That's just how I felt. And, to be frank, I think that it also has to do with my entrepreneurial spirit. And, I need more action and more responsibility and stuff. But I still think this is an important point to make, because the UN is an incredibly important institution in the world, and especially today. But I think that there is so much reason for us to rethink our systems. And then at this time, this is also in my late 20s, I realize, for me personally, like, people change systems, systems don't change themselves. So that's what I wanted to focus on. So I end up, I also go through a really hard time personally. I recently become a mom. I'm almost divorced. And the ground that I'd been standing on was kind of shaking. My dream job wasn't as I'd hoped for. I felt very disillusioned. And also with my future, spouse, and dreams about the future and future family and how we would live our life were kind of crumbling before me. And I end up, being diagnosed with 3 slipped discs, and the doctor tells me you might not ever be able to work full time ever again. So I felt like really fighting for my life, and that just kind of the energy I'm used to having, and like this deep sense of purpose and belonging. And it was just like slowly going away from me, slipping between my fingers. And I managed to find this like very strong center of gravity inside me. We can go into that in more depth, but just to make a long story short, where I just really had this pocket, like this moment, instead of lack of sleep and all the things going on around me, feeling like the earth beneath my feet was moving super fast. I managed to find this moment where I just, was with myself. I was by the sea in Iceland, and this question came to me, just, Hrund, when you are an old woman and you look back on your life, what kind of a life would you have wanted to live? And I just had this vision of me being very vibrant, vivid, in close intimacy with people of all ages, speaking, engaging. And it was the feeling was very strong. I couldn't put a label on it, like what title or job is it, but it was just this feeling of being very much a part of the world in all its different shades and colors, and just, and the feeling consumed me. So I just knew then that I was about to resign from my dream job, because I wanted to do things differently. And I went back to Geneva to finish everything. And I sat in the Palais des Nations, this beautiful building for the UN. And I had this imagined conversation with Kofi Annan, who was then the Secretary General, who had originally sent me the invitation for the job in his name. And I promised myself that I would stay true to the ideals of the UN. I really think it's important that we want to make a difference in the world and make it a better place, because we were in it and with the people around us. But I decided that because I feel like the systems need to change with the tide of time, that I would have the courage to follow through with ideas that wouldn't let me be, that really wanted to come to fruition. And I would have the courage to follow them through whatever sector or discipline they would be in. And so that's why I've had close to 30 titles in my life. It turns out that's actually a very intuitive way of working, because intuition flows, it connects thoughts, it cross fertilizes. That's how its logic works. That's also how we maintain it and allow it to grow. So I didn't realize this at the time, but that's how.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We're going to definitely dive into some practical advice and how intuition can help you and some of these decisions and stuff like that. But that's, thanks for sharing that. It's not that the UN isn't a good institution. It's that it wasn't good for you in terms of aligned with who you were and the type of work you wanted to do in the world. But, those things aren't necessarily easy to let go of. And in your story, of course, I know you're sharing, kind of summarizing a lot of a lot of emotions, a lot of years of experience, and a lot of trauma in some ways with the work you did in Kosovo, seeing the effects of war on a country and its people. All of that, taking all of that in, that is huge part of your journey, right? Like carrying that into the UN job. And I think that's where in the book you kind of lean into the healing aspects that you refer to in the subtitle. And, that's a different way of looking at intuition as I think about it. Often we think about it as a decision-making tool, or I'd say I think about it as a decision-making tool. But these aspects of healing, reviving and resetting and self-care and things like that, I want to get into a bit of that now and some of the practical stuff around that. But I guess, you can talk about the Icelandic term Innsæi. I love these malleable cultural terms that come from countries that can almost, like, if you're from that country, you know what it means, but you can't necessarily always put it into words. It can mean a lot of things. I feel like this is one of those terms, yet your job as an author is to put it into words. So can you talk about it, and along the way, maybe give us a definition of intuition, or your definition of intuition, which is kind of a slippery word in some ways.
Yes. And thank you for this and putting up the lens on intuition as a decision-making tool, because that's really so true. And interestingly, depending on the people I speak with, people have all these wonderful relationships with intuition. And it turns out also we have different ways of defining it depending on schools of thoughts and discipline. And so just to start unraveling your question is to say, I discovered that we define intuition as all the way from it being an irrational impulse we shouldn't rely on, to something woo-woo that hasn't been backed by science. And then in between, we have all these amazing rigorous research, but also timeless wisdom, practice, which I started to collect together and cross-fertilize in a sense, just to see the big picture. And I realized that we often talk about intuition and then there's analytical thinking or logic. But intuition is actually fundamental to our intelligence. So in order to reason well, you need to have a good intuition. You need to know when you can rely on it and when not. And, in order
I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you say that, do you mean that it's actually saturating these other parts of our thinking as opposed to being a separate entity?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, sometimes when you add 2 + 2 is 4, you don't need your intuition to do that. But everything from asking questions and how you thought process them and how you manifest them into real life, or if you don't, then, and all the way to how you connect things and how you follow that sensory data that we all have access to, which is most of the data fabric that we have access to, but it's mostly unconscious. And so intuition helps us tap into that. So yes, intuition is part of all the intellectual architecture that we have access to. And what's also important is that intuition is an embodied intelligence. So it's not something that is only inside our brains or even a small part of our brains. It really collects information throughout all our bodies, because it's, as I said, sensory data. So we can go more into that a little bit later. But to your question, so in order to open up the concept Innsæi and also to talk about how I define intuition, I agree with experts who say it's hard to define intuition in one sentence, but I still want to share a definition that I'm quite happy with. It's not all comprehensive, but it's a recent scientific definition by Joel Pearson, neuroscientist from Australia, who would define intuition as an efficient and learned use of unconscious information to make better decisions and actions. It says a big story. So it's the use of unconscious information, which is 95 to 99% of our overall consciousness. That's a lot of information. And it also says to make better decisions and better actions. So I think that's super important. But the reason why I went back to my mother tongue and the Icelandic language to look at the word Innsæi was because I felt our understanding of intuition was so fragmented because it kind of fell into the different silos and, disciplines that we've created in order to help us think about the world and our place in it. And so I saw the Icelandic word as if for the first time. And every time we adopt a new concept, tool, or technology into Icelandic, we create a new word for it. We don't just put an accent on the English word or whatever. So the man who created the word for intuition, Sigurður Nordal, he created the word Innsæi. And Innsæi is made up of two words, in and sæi. In means inside or into, and sæi means to see or refers to the sea. So the way that we started to open up this concept, this word, was first through the documentary film we did about Innsæi. And that's the threefold meaning, which is Innsæi as a concept with capital INS means the sea within, first of all. And that refers to our unconscious mind, ever-flowing, fast, super, super fast paced mind, which is much faster than our focused conscious mind. It's constantly cross-fertilizing. It's the world beyond words. It's a world of imagination, vision, emotions, feelings, and things like that. And if we put the sea within into silos or boxes, it ceases to flow. And that's the poetry in the word, because a state of flow is an example of a mind state that we can reach when we use many of our different faculties together, and intuition steps into its prominent role. And then secondly, Innsæi means to see within. And that has to do with something that's very fundamental to our ability to hone, harness, train our intuition. And that has to do with self-awareness. So to see within is about seeing inside yourself, knowing yourself well enough to be able to put yourself into other people's shoes. And importantly, when it comes to judgment, however, whether it's at work or in our personal lives, our ability to discern intuition from biases, fears, wishful thinking, when we can rely on intuition and when we can't. Because we all have intuition, but it's absolutely up to us to hone and harness it. And the only experts, true experts in our intuition is ourselves. So we need to know when lots of different things about when we can rely on our intuition and when not. So that has to do with self-awareness, metacognition, interoception. And then the third meaning of Innsæi is to see from the inside out. And that is about having a strong inner compass as we navigate the ocean of life and work. So as you can hear, the Innsæi concept with the capital INS is something that I've developed into a very clear framework and how we can access our intuition and hone and harness it. But also it holds space for both, the poetic and practical, and the scientific and the spiritual. So we're not just scientific beings. We're not just spiritual beings. We're not just emotional beings or rational beings. Or, sometimes poetry captures the essence of life better than any mathematical formula, and so on and so forth.
Beautiful. So well said. The interpretation of intuition, which you just laid out for us, right? I mean, would you say that is the thing that allows us to tap into it in some ways? Is it how we think about it as an individual? Is that the sort of starting point? Because if there's somebody that is like, okay, yeah, it's a thing, but that's woo-woo. Like you mentioned the woo-woo scale of things, right? If they're just like, this is crap. Like you can't really use your intuition to get ahead in life. It's all about your practical mind. Does that mean like to you that intuition essentially doesn't exist for that person, even though they still have it? It's just like a dormant virus in some ways. Not a virus, that would be the wrong word, but you know what I mean? It's like a dormant within themselves. I'm just bringing this up because not to harp on the definition point, but if this is the critical sort of first step and sort of like understanding what it means for you as an individual, I'm talking to the listeners here, then everything else kind of comes from that, right? Like if you can't nail that part, if you can't believe that it's a tool and a thing that you can use, then it's essentially not going to be there for you in some ways, even though it is there. It's just going to be this invisible force that you don't tap into. So let's get people with a variety of like life experiences and frameworks and all of that. What do you say to the people on that like are this isn't really something I can use in my daily life? How do we bring them over, Hrund, to this side? And so then we can go into some of the practical tools that we can use to access, hone, and harness it, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful question, and help me sharpen it if I kind of divert from the core and the essence. So I want to say, to begin with, I'm one of those people I'm very analytical. I consider myself very logical. I am like trained in education through some of our best universities in the world. I've gone that route in life.
Right. Okay. Like sort of like an academic mindset.
An academic mindset, yeah. Very rigorous. I'm very detailed, like in my thinking. And so I absolutely honor and understand when people feel like that. I also want to say that most of us are in our education systems, almost wherever we look, most of us are trained in the analytical reason muscles.
That's a systemic problem.
It's a systemic problem, but the part of the reason, which I think helps us clarify a little bit to take the steps forward into this conversation, part of the reason why we've been training the analytical logical muscle at the cost of the intuitive, imaginative, creative muscle is because the analytical logical muscle is much easier to repeat, to compare, and to train in a systematic way. But there is body of like so much research, like I'm looking at one of the books in my shelves, The Agile Mind by Vilma Kutstal. It's one of the many books that we have that show us how valuable it is to train analysis with intuition. I also want to share with the group of people who are listening, exactly like you say, who come from such different varied backgrounds. A recent research on Nobel laureates, which like a Nobel laureate is somebody that we consider to be highly intelligent, the human genius. That's the reason why the researchers researched a group of Nobel laureates, because they wanted to understand if and how they used their intuition. The conclusion, in short, shows that the reason why they were able to come up with their big leaps in their discoveries was because they knew how to switch between analysis and intuition. So that's another way of saying it's not just analysis, it's not just intuition. It's about knowing how they work together and how they're mutually constructive. And another thing which this research shows, and I see it everywhere, and I've seen it for over 20 years, including in myself, is that we use our intuition most of the time, but we are mostly unaware of it. So even for the Nobel laureates who took part in this research, not all of them realized that this was actually intuition. So just to honor the fact that we are not so used to talking about intuition in this like hardcore intellectual way that we are doing right now. So I just really want to recognize that, because if people are feeling, oh, I've never thought about it like this before, then I want to say I'm not surprised. This is not something that we are accustomed to exploring. And the world of science and even the people who follow their intuition, they're often very reluctant to admit it in public. I've often been that person previously in my life, and it's so common that we wrap our intuition in some data set that we found, and it's part of our confirmation bias as well. It's like, and so on and so forth. So I think that for the people who are skeptical about intuition, I just want to say that we think about consciousness as a 360 holistic thing that we are a part of. If we all agree that we have consciousness, and not everybody agrees on that, but let's agree on that now in this conversation. We talk about the unconscious and the conscious mind, so very focused conscious mind that we are alert and awake in, that we are using now as we talk. And then the unconsciousness, which is working super fast, picking up. Most recent scientific explanations is saying we pick up trillions of sensory data points every second of every day. I have no idea how many zeros there are in the amount of information we are picking up through our whole body, but it's important to say there's a lot of information. And it is our brains are working in harmony with the rest of the body, the vagus nerve, the organs, and the senses. It's deciding which information to take and put as a priority and act from, So this is all happening without us being conscious of it. And that's fine. I mean, if we were conscious of it, we would absolutely lose our minds. It's too fast. But it's happening anyway. It is informing our intuitions. It's informing our decisions, our perceptions, how we think, show up, react. Given the fact that attention is our key to intuition and our attention is a super scarce resource in today's world, it's highly sought after by trillion-dollar market forces, among other things. We need to become better stewards of our own attention and therefore our own intuition. And that translates into higher intelligence and better decision-making. That's the work we need to do. So for the people who are very rational, like analytical, practical thinkers, think about this for a while.
Yeah.
Because intuition is playing its role anyway.
Yeah, if the brain is filtering, as you mentioned, the external world, because so much is going in, you're essentially, well, some would argue, some say, the brain is producing the consciousness, but then others are reversing it, and like the consciousness is essentially infinite, but your brain's job is just to filter in some ways. And so you could think about, based on this conversation, I would say you could think about intuition as, it can be a part of that filtering system, but it's also everything outside of the filter.
Yeah, exactly. It is in constant dialogue with the world around us. And so the world within and the world around is constantly in dialogue. It's pure existence.
Yeah. I think everybody's experienced it, whether they believe it or not. And I think I would say probably most people listening are pretty honed into the idea that intuition can help them. And that's the thing for me. It's like, I would say as we move into the sort of the practical side of this and how we can access, hone, and harness it, as you mentioned in your words, just embracing the idea that it can help you. Like, I cannot function without my intuition. None of us can. I think everybody's experienced it on some level. If they, walk into a place and they sense that, there's somebody there that's not quite right or off, they might be a danger or a threat. All of that is instantaneous. To me, that's a version of your intuition, right? Or somebody's telling you something and have an interaction and this person doesn't feel quite right, or this situation doesn't feel quite right. That's not academic. And you mentioned the embodiment, that intuition is an embodied trait, if you will. That's where, you feel something in your gut, the heart, the feelings in your body, the goosebumps you might get when you meet somebody. Where do we start this? How do we start the practical side of this? The ideas that can, let's say, help people the most to lean into their intuition. This is like, by the way, on a personal note, this is super timely for me as I go about making a lot of different business decisions right now. It is very difficult, Hrund, to set aside biases and, things, especially when money's involved. You're like, all right, should I invest this amount of money in this thing to try to accomplish this thing? That can be very analytical, but let's measure our return on investment. Let's see if blah, 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 blah. But, the core decision at the beginning, especially when finances or business is involved, it can be very difficult to incorporate the intuitive side of things. So let's talk about how we can do it.
Everything you said is super important, and everything you said touches on different layers and areas of life. And let's start with the business decision. So for the people listening, if business decision doesn't relate, then think about it like I'm taking a decision about what,
travel. Like travel. If I'm going to quit my job and travel,
right,
for example, or so that's those are financial decisions in many ways. Traveling is a financial decision for a lot of people. You could look at it as an investment in yourself, whatever, there's a whole intuitive side to that.
Yes.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can decide, we can get this idea that a business venture or travel is a great idea because it advances us in our journey to become better at what we do or better humans or whatever. And we're really excited about the idea. And then just a few minutes later, feelings start creeping in.
Yeah.
And we get, oh my God, what am I saying?
This is crazy. Why would I do this? This is so stupid.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with the travel, it's like, oh my God, that's wild. And with the business idea, it's like, oh my God, I could really, earn a lot of money from this or whatever.
You're excited for 3 days and then you're like, I can't do this. Why would I? This is a terrible idea.
Yeah. And then you go on to ask people for advice, like you said, like, should I do this? Should I not? Weighing up the pros and cons. And so there is the part of weighing up pros and cons, which has to do with, is this practical? A practical question is always valid, also for intuition. Is it practical? Is it doable? Is it realistic? But then there's also, how do we feel about it? How does it sit with us? And that's the tuning in we need to do, that has to do with tuning into our whole body. And, every time I'm offered something in the form of sitting on a board or job or whatever, I always say, let me sleep on it.
Yeah. Okay. So you can process it subconsciously.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why we say this. I mean, and this is well researched. It's actually to do that exactly. And as we sleep, we regulate our nervous system. When we lie horizontally, we regulate our nervous system. So anyone listening, lie on the floor now, horizontally, and just feel the regulation that happens to your nervous system. This is important. Why? Because one of the conditions that we should not be relying on our intuition is when we are emotionally imbalanced. Intuition is like, emotional imbalance can be anger, anxiety, but also we are absolutely in love or we are hyper excited about something. It means that it's good to find a way to, like ground zero, regulate your system in order to tap into your best possible decision making in this situation. There is also, according to science, there is, and again, referring to Joel Pearson, probability calculations, intuition does not seem to work well there. While at the same time, other people, like some of our world famous investors, would say, actually, I disagree with that because I use data information to process through my intuition. So there are different ways of doing that. But I would always say, don't neglect data like quantitative information. Don't neglect them. Use them to help you decide what aligns best with your inner compass and intuition to do in the situation. Because what aligns best with you, and this means that you're taking in your values, you're taking in what you want to do with your life. Speaking of travel, you need to use that as part of the cosmos that you're trying to create out of the chaos that you're in. But allow time to work with you. So to take it a step further in a practical, how do we do this? We all know that it's good to regulate our nervous system. I've said that. We all know also that it's good to, gain clarity of thought through mindfulness, physical exercises, meditations. We can go into that more if we want to. But what I want to add to all of this is understanding that we need to have a quiet mind and environment in order to reflect deeply on something. Journaling to me is absolutely one of the most important tools ever in order to hone in and align with our intuition. So I teach few ways of journaling, few methods to journal. And the more we do this as part of our daily life, the more we start to feel how journaling helps us, dump the noise onto the piece of paper and clean up some space to think more clearly. But journaling also helps us see black and white the things that keep coming up in our minds. We think about 6,200 thoughts per day, according to Queen's University research. We are not aware of all these thoughts. Our thoughts are super important when it comes to our courage to follow our deepest longings, for example. The thoughts we think about ourselves are super powerful when it comes to setting boundaries for ourselves and giving us permissions to dream big or do things. But it's important to remember that we are not our thoughts, we are the thinkers of our thoughts. So when we journal them on a piece of paper, we start to see black and white. What are these thoughts that are taking up the space in my mind and informing my decisions? And that's very important, because then we also realize that actually here's a recurring thought which doesn't leave me alone. I have to do something about it. That's the business, or that's the travel. And then there are thoughts that come up that you realize they're not even in my voice. Whose voice is this? Is this thought constructive or destructive? And you start to recognize patterns in how you stand in the way of yourself. You start to recognize patterns in how you actually really want to live your life, but you're very afraid of doing that. And you start to sharpen your intuition into decisions like that. And sometimes intuition speaks to us in the form of data. It comes to you, Jason, and says, Jason, you might want to travel now to the Amazon rainforest. And then intuition says to you, I've told you, it's up to you what to do with it. Okay, see you later. And then it's up to you what to do with it. So you need to think about, am I ready to step through that door or not? And sometimes we're not ready to listen to our intuition. And I have a feeling that if not 100%, then 95% of listeners will relate to this sentence. Intuition speaks to us, but we're not always ready to act on our intuitions. And it's okay, it's okay. Recognize it, and then observe yourself. If you wake up one day and you feel like you actually have the willingness to take the risk or to follow through with courage, to do what your intuition is telling you, your deeper self is telling you, then it's time to act on it. But it's not always right to act on our intuition if we really aren't ready for it.
Okay. Yeah, that's powerful, because the inaction, if the voice is telling you something and you're just, for whatever reason, you're emotionally held up, you're financially held up, whatever, letting go of what you're saying is basically letting go of the shame or letting go of the guilt of not taking the intuitive action that you're supposed to take, which is super powerful, I think. And thank you for that, because that ties in with a lot of the stuff you're talking about with healing or reviving or resetting, I should say. I mean, all these things play into this. But yeah, that can be difficult when you hear something and it's something you're supposed to do and you're just not quite able to do it yet for whatever reason, which can be, a lot of times those reasons aren't necessarily even definable, right? They're just sort of like, for whatever reason, you can't break up with that person, or you can't, you're just unable to do it in that moment, even though your intuition is telling you to, and that can be hard. Okay. The journaling you mentioned is such a powerful thing. What is the most effective journaling technique that you've found through your teachings?
So there are two main techniques that I find very powerful. And one of them is journaling in a stream of consciousness, what Julia Cameron calls the morning pages.
Yeah, that has been the best for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julia Cameron is the queen of journaling, and I always want to honor her and her name and thank her for what she's taught me. And I really did her course 20 plus years ago, and I did it like very conscientiously, thoroughly, and it really transformed so much of the process I was going through. And it was when I was going through my deepest healing.
The artist way you're referring to.
The artist's way, exactly. Yeah. And just as a short kind of description for anyone who's not maybe ready to go into that whole book, but just to say, journaling in a stream of consciousness is about waking up in the morning and giving yourself the gift of a few minutes. And I always say, start with 2 minutes or 5 minutes if that's all you have. Like, don't worry about it. It's fine. Grab a pen or a pencil, and it's neurologically, physiologically more powerful, impactful to do that than to use a keyboard. So really buy that journal, get that journal, write it down, and write in a stream of consciousness. And that means that you connect your mind with your hand. You start to write whatever comes up for you. Don't judge what it is, just write it. And if you don't know what to write, then write, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. And if you feel silly, then write, I feel silly. What am I doing here? Why am I, whatever. Allow whatever comes, come. And then gradually you will start to write things down that are fragmented, but they are your thoughts and they are streaming anyway inside your consciousness, and write them on a piece of paper. Many things help you through this process. One of them is cleaning up space in your mind, more clarity. Another one is what we mentioned earlier about recurring thoughts, ideas. We are not our thoughts. We are the thinkers of our thoughts. Let's be more disciplined about what are the thoughts we think about as well. And also let's be pleasantly surprised about the ideas that come up and the misunderstandings and the creativity. The other type of journaling that I teach, and I've taught this to hundreds of people, and it's so powerful, and it's going to sound very simple, but trust me, it's very powerful. And it's about our attention. We mentioned that our attention is the key to intuition, but it's a very scarce resource. And we pay attention to lots of things during the course of a day, but do we pay attention to what it is that we pay attention to? So the invitation for the listener is to pay attention to what you pay attention to and document it in your journal. And when you do this, you are not writing down, I woke up, I had a toast, there was sun or rain. You're not doing that kind of journaling. You are writing colorful flags, strange energy, wonderful smile, goosebumps, shoes on a rainy pavement. Just these are like Kodak moments. These are just like flash moments from the day that think about it this way, your attention is picking up for you. And it's almost like saying to yourself, I'm going to observe what my attention is picking up for me. I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to say anything about it. Sometimes we notice things that we don't really like us to notice. Like if somebody, we thoughts that we don't like to be thinking, but we sometimes think thoughts or notice things that we're not proud of. So the act is also to catch that too, write it down, and don't judge yourself. It's not yours to judge. This is what your attention is picking up for you. This approach is, when I started to learn it, I was thinking about it more as a writer and a creative person. And I learned it from an artist and a writer as well. But then a few years later, I learned the word mindfulness. And so it has a lot to do with mindfulness, but it's not just that. It's really how a lot of creative people live and work and notice the environment. It's like making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. It's about turning on the lights of your attention so that you can light up as a human being. It's almost like photosynthesizing as a human being. It's like notice beauty as well. It's like, yeah, you illuminate your senses and everything by doing this as well. So that's another way of describing it. So, and in my book, I give people a few exercises in how to do this. And you've done this for a week, then you sit down and do this and that, so there's different recipes around it. But in essence, pay attention to what it is that you pay attention to and document it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think these are freeing concepts in terms of an approach to journaling, because the thing that always held me back from journaling was the idea that, I needed to be Hemingway or something. Like I was going to write something, I had to write something profound about my life and everything that was going on. I had to describe everything, and not everybody enjoys writing in that way. But the stream of consciousness thing, or the Kodak moments that you mentioned, this approach is it's just freeing. And I think it allows you to it sets you up for quote unquote success, in the sense that you don't feel like you have to live up to any expectation. It is what it is kind of thing. And so then that allows you to do it. But I think the journaling is a great example of a practice that, like personally, I know I've done the morning pages thing that you mentioned in The Artist's Way, and it's been super impactful. Yet, even though I know it's impactful, I still don't make time to do it all the time, even though I know it takes me to good places, inevitably. After 3 pages of the journaling, which she recommends, I always end up getting to something. Like a lot of times sometimes 2.5, 2 3/4 pages is total crap. But then I get to something that is either meaningful for my life or just for the day or even just for the moment. And it's like clockwork. So why don't I do that every day? Well, that's why I'm talking to you, to get back on this track, because I think that, that's the thing, these things that, and then I wanted to get your process for decision making, because I think because like the morning pages or the journaling, I think that's an example of a practice that can lead you to the bigger questions. But then you have to take like one of those questions, like, should I leave my job at the UN, and make a decision on those using your intuition, ideally. How do we do that part of it? Like, yeah, because I know you have some meditations, and there's a ton of, we should mention the book again, Innsæi, which we'll link up to, because you have a lot of, some of these meditations you share, and some of the things in here are really, yeah, they're really great. Like I'm definitely going to have this book right at the ready when I need it. And I think that the journaling, some of the meditations, the quietness, the sort of like the stillness you need to tune into your body and things like that, those are the things that, for better or worse, in today's society, are the hardest things to make time for. And that's one of the things I want people to come out of this with, is because you can give some of these, like I would like you to share one of these meditations or some of the things in your decision-making process. But the overall point is that you have to think it's important enough to make time to do and understand the value of it. Much like when I get away from my computer during the workday and go for a walk, I know this is helping me in the long run. Like, this isn't wasting time. This is actually informing all the work that I do, instead of being like sort of this trying to get a bunch of to-do list things done. And so that's the big sort of challenge I think we face in the attention economy today, is like, let's actually, like, you need to see the value in carving out that space in order to like even get there in the first place. Do you agree?
Yeah, so I very much agree. I think this is a very important point. And I think that the facts, the data, the real life stories, the practice, the science helps us be convinced that this is worth doing. And I also want to say that when in my book, I write about shifting the center of gravity in how we show up. So there's something about being aligned with your inner compass and your intuition. There's a different way of showing up when you are that, as opposed to not being grounded in yourself and always outsourcing your inner expertise to someone else or something else.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
Do you feel the difference in the two?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you show up that way every day, how do we show up that way every day?
You train the muscle of intuition. And and through the various exercises, and the more that you embody what it means to be aligned with your intuition, the easier it becomes. It's actually easier. So it's like, intuition is an embodied intelligence. That's one thing. So when you start to notice these moments when you are following your intuition, when you start to notice these moments when you're not, when you start to notice how your intuition speaks to you, this is when you've started to align with it. And you allow it to happen whether you're washing the dishes or out for a run or you're in a meeting somewhere. But you have to be present in yourself. We can't be fully present 100% of the time, let's be honest. But when we are present in ourselves as often as we can, that's the opportunity we have to access our intuition, and also actually the accumulated knowledge and expertise that we've accumulated throughout our lives. This is what we know from, military literature and strategic business and everything. It's like being with yourself. So for example, you're in a meeting, it's super busy. There's a lot of pressure. Everybody's talking. You have to show up in a certain way so that people listen to you speak, whatever it is. If you just say to yourself in that meeting, you put both feet on the floor and you notice that the soles of your feet are on the floor. You say your name to yourself. You say, hello, just Hrund. You're here. Hi, Hrund. Sit in yourself. Be with yourself. That's a different way of showing up. It doesn't mean you have to meditate for an hour before you go to that meeting. But when we leave ourselves, when our minds leave our bodies, and they go swirling around and thinking, oh no, I should say it like this. Oh no, I should say it like this. Or I need to follow this, or I need to follow that. It's like, then you've lost alignment with your intuition.
Yeah, okay. So get back in to the sea.
Yeah. And know what
within yourself.
Like. Yeah.
So you can see. Like. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So when you're going to make a decision, like moving to Germany, selling your house, for example, do you have a process for that? Do you sit down? I mean, I know that's the tricky question, because it's probably some of these things happen over weeks, and sometimes for people it's like within an hour they change their whole lives. I've talked to people like that, but the journaling is one aspect. Do you sometimes, like before you go into a conversation like this, or, making a big decision, do you have a practice where you sit down and you like breathe for a few minutes, or, how do you let's do this. Give everybody a call to action to take with them out of this episode and give them the practical tools for doing it. Like one example could be after this interview, take one of the decisions you've been hemming and hawing on, as we say, you haven't been able to sort of, even though your intuition's been telling you to do something, and make a decision. Like, do it or don't do it. If you're not going to do it because you're not ready to listen to your intuition, like Hrund said, don't feel guilty about it, but make a decision one way or the other. If that's going to be the call to action, can you give people some tools to finish this podcast, when they have some time within the next 24 hours, let's say, because I like actionable sort of takeaways. What should they do to kind of figure that out? What tools can you give them? Journaling can be one.
Yeah. So I think that, one of the things you mentioned, you said, how do you show up for an interview like this? So this morning I had a very busy, difficult morning. And things that just have to do with members of the family, neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. Just things that are...
a bunch of life crap.
Yeah, that's how life is, right?
Yeah.
So what I needed to do was drink a glass of water. And I did a few breathing that really calmed the nervous system down. And honestly, it's a breathing technique that I can share with you in just a minute. And it's, you breathe in on 6. You count to 6 in your mind as you breathe in. And then when you breathe out, you pierce your lips together so that it's really hard for the air to go out. Sorry, you breathe in on 3.
Yeah, okay.
You breathe in on 3.
Yep.
And then when you breathe out twice as long. And you pierce your lips together so that it's harder for the air to go out. Can you feel it?
Yeah.
So you do this 3 times and you literally feel how your system calms down and you become heavier in your body. This means that you're coming home to yourself and you are regulating your nervous system. It stills the ocean, the sea within you. There's more clarity of mind that you have. And the reason why I started this interview by asking you, am I correct that you have just been traveling? It's because I want to connect with you before we start an interview. So that's another way for me to be connected with I want to be connected within. I want to connect with people. I want to see them smile. I want to see, I just did this or whatever. It only takes a few seconds sometimes, but it's important to make connections and to feel because we co-regulate as a species, right? We start to co-regulate and we are talking together and it's been a wonderful conversation and it's not been stressful or hostile or whatever. It's been a wonderful conversation and we can both affect that experience of it. So that's important. For the other things you mentioned, for people who are taking difficult decisions. So and you mentioned there's big decisions that I've taken. For me, intuition often appears to be like a spontaneous decision, but for me, it's something that's been brewing over time. And I always need time. I'm that kind of person. We need varied amount of time to do stuff, but for me, it takes time. And so I think for people who are listening, who feel like something is in them, really grab a pen or a pencil and write down what that is. What is it that you feel like you should be doing or you shouldn't be doing? What is the somatic, what's the bodily reaction you're feeling now? How does it feel in your body? Even if you don't have words for it. Like, I have a knot in my stomach, or I get these butterflies in my stomach, or I get goosebumps. Why? Write it down. If you don't know the answer, it's fine, but allow it to be, because your body is trying to tell you something. And so that's one of the things with intuition. It doesn't always come in an alphabetical order, It doesn't always have a language around it. It sometimes just starts as a feeling of excitement or a feeling of something's off. So try to write about this for you so that slowly you will understand what's emerging for you. What is trying to come from the sea within to the surface of your consciousness and focused mind so that you can actually do something with it.
Yeah. I love that visual. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the power of bringing things into consciousness, in our conscious mind. It makes pain easier to work through. even if it sounds light to say. That's a real thing. It also makes decisions easier. And then I also think it's important if people are aspiring to go on this amazing travel, to give themselves in their life, like they really want to do that, write that down in a sentence and observe that sentence for you and do that for a few days and think what's stopping you, what's supporting you, what you need from you and then others in order for this to happen. And your intuition will speak with you along the way. It doesn't always have a yes or no answer. It has an answer that's like, why don't you probe that a little bit better? Why are you afraid of this? What happens if you never do this in your life? What happens if you do this in your life? Whom are you afraid to lose? Whom are you afraid will criticize you? Is this voice worth living by? You know, a lot of us are just simply afraid of stepping into our space, our voice, ourselves in life, because there's a Joe or a Jane that might make fun of us, or, you know, sometimes it's not much bigger than that.
Can I keep you for a couple more questions? I know we're getting long,
Yeah.
but I'm sorry. I'm just so
Yeah.
fascinated by this conversation and your work and this topic and everything. The relationship between intuition and creativity. What is that, in your opinion?
I think it's like Siamese twins or something. I think it's like absolutely a bundle. It's part of one another. So both intuition and creativity have a lot to do with going into the unknown. You know, so like if you're doing something creative, you don't know exactly how it's going to end up, what's going to happen along the way, what the exact outcome is, because then you're not maybe doing something so very creative, right? So, you know, this is like this is also a topic for a longer conversation, but creativity is about flow. I always go into the movement, the sea, the cross fertilization, the allowing things to flow and having an open mind enough in order for things to show up that really want to show up. But having said that about creativity, I also am a big believer in creating rules or frames or timelines for things. You know, so one of the things I did in the beginning of this year, just to describe intuition and creativity in my work, in the beginning of this year, I realized I was becoming impatient with. I needed clarity for the direction I wanted to take this year. There's so much to do about intuition in the world. So as I mentioned, my book is coming out in all continents in 13 languages. Like, where do I even start? You know, it's so exciting. So I thought to myself, okay, I need to create a frame. I'm going to create a time frame, both in the act, but also in the thinking. So what that means is I sat down, I put the timer on 60 minutes. I downloaded the template from the internet. There was the strategic planning for a green company, energy company. I downloaded the template, which was one page, and I filled it in 60 minutes with my strategic planning for Innsæi in the next 4 years. And and I was not logical while doing it. I was in a state of flow, which is very much part of creativity and intuition. And what came out of it is something I'm still working with, and it was super valuable. It doesn't mean that I invented what I came up with in these 60 minutes. It just meant that I created the condition for all these remarkable, wonderful connections I have been making over the months and years to come to the surface of my focused attention. And that is what it brought me.
I love that. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Creating the conditions. So yeah, in that sense too, another practical thing I just want to pull out is that, because I do this when I prepare for interviews too, that setting a timer and just like, you know, because it could go on, it can be an infinite thing, right? I could have been spending, 14 hours preparing for this conversation because there's so much to unpack.
Yeah.
But like you said, I mean, 4 years of strategic sort of planning in 60 minutes, there is something to that, like on a practical sense too. Let me just like set those conditions, open up, and then set a timer, because we all have sort of time limitations in our life. So I think that's just so great.
It's very powerful. And another thing that I want to mention is as well, we put pressures on ourselves. So I'm not just talking about financial pressures or performance pressures that others put on us. I'm talking about pressures that we put on ourselves. Like, and I'm so like, I know this so well, like perfectionist, like when I designed the education program, I ended up directing years back. I had to discipline myself not to get caught up in pressuring myself. So if I was in a good mode, if I was enjoying what I was doing and I was thinking freely, then I knew I should continue. But as soon as I started to think about how will we get the money for exactly this small part of the program, or what will I do after it finishes, or something, then I knew it was time to stop. So these are like very mundane pressures that we put on ourselves, but they can block our creativity and intuition. So it's flow again, allow things to flow, put aside your logical, analytical mind, overthinking mind for a while.
Okay. Tough question here, but I'm not even sure how to ask this without sort of setting it up improperly. But is intuition part of the unseen universe, let's say? Some people might believe that's God. Others believe it's the universe, universal forces. Other people might believe it's Mother Earth or different, whatever your belief system is, that's individual. But is it part of that fabric?
Sorry?
Is it part of that fabric, I would say?
Fabric.
Yeah.
So one way of saying this is the mind and body are an ecosystem. Think about ecosystem. It's complex. The mind and body are really interconnected. We used to think that we can just think about the shoulder or one organ in isolation with the rest of the body. We still have health systems that honor that. But more and more, we understand that it's an interconnected system, which means that it's complex, which means that it's what I like to call ecosystem. So we sometimes talk about ecosystem thinking. And that means that we are not putting everything into silos and boxes and isolating and thinking in a fragmented way, but how everything is interconnected and coexists and interbeing and all these things. So when you think about it like that, which I think intuition is definitely a part of, and our consciousness, and there is so much we don't know about intuition, consciousness, and the brain. Let's keep that very clear for this conversation. But when you think about it this way, that the world within and the world around us, how do we know where the world ends? How do we know that? Nobody knows that. We have different ways of explaining the world. There's the spiritual, there's the scientific, there's the poetic, there's the emotional, there's all these different layers of how we interact with the world that we live in. If you go to some of the indigenous communities and you ask them about intuition, they will say, of course we use intuition. And then they will say, but I don't think we necessarily have a word for it because it's
just part of their life.
Yeah. And they won't necessarily divide consciousness into conscious mind and unconscious or subconscious. They're like, it's all part of the same consciousness. What do you mean? Why are you dividing it into different groups? So there are
because we have to label and divide everything.
Yes, we do. And cultures have a different need, different level of need to do that. So I think in order to address your question, I don't think that anybody really knows the answer to that question. I think that we are part of, I think that their energy is a real thing. There is energy in everything. There is stardust in us. We are 97% made of the same stuff as stars in the universe. That's amazing. It's beautiful. But there's so many things I don't know about that. If you would ask me, Hrund, have you ever felt like life is just leading you through something, and especially difficult times? My answer is yes. And if you would ask me, does intuition have to do with that, or do you know what it is? I would say, I don't know. But I think intuition has something to do with that because it's sometimes it's the only thing we can listen to. But I can't really answer that question better than that. I think it's more about being in awe of how little we know, how much there is to discover, and to really just try to figure out for ourselves how we think about life in the world and our place in it.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up. I do want to pull out a quote from page 42 of your book, which we'll mention one more time, Innsæi, Heal, Revive, and Reset with the Icelandic Art of Intuition. And by the way, where do you prefer people go to get this book?
So go to any wonderful bookstore close to you, local bookstore, wherever you are. It should be in all major bookstores. If you buy it online, then buy it through the online bookstore that you prefer. It's available in most places, I would think.
That's great. Yeah, congratulations on the book,
Thank
by the
you.
way. No small thing. Especially, I'm sure it was difficult to write some of the personal stuff. I mean, you have to decide what to share. And anyway, on page 42, you said, when we feel lacking in love for ourselves, we should do the work and develop it, because without it, we cannot show love and support to others, which comes back to self-care and self-love. And to me, I would love to hear your final thoughts, but one of the things that I think ties this conversation up is going back to the subtitle of this book, Heal, Revive, and Reset, whichever one of those resonates with you. And that idea of that, making time for these things is the self-care and the self-love. Making time to tap in to the intuition is that. I've gained a lot from this conversation. I trust 100% of my creativity, and that has done so much for me. But I can't say I always trust 100% into my intuition. And so you've given me a lot of tools today to, try to hone in on that and improve that percentage, I would say. Yeah. So thank you very much. And do you want to share just some final thoughts to send people on their way for the rest of their day? What do you think, coming out of this, would you like people to walk away with as a number one sort of takeaway?
So I'm just connecting with what you've just said about the what you read from my book and how you tied your thoughts to that. And I just want to build on that and say, there is this thing about intuition, which is just so incredibly mundane and humane. And it's probably part of all of us. And that is the confidence in our own judgment, which I think I know that a lot of people are dealing with that in the world today for many different reasons. Self-care and self-love is about having trust in your own judgment. And many of us have a tendency, without realizing it, that we throw aside our experiences and feelings and emotions about things because we don't want to cause any strain to another person. We don't want to rock the boat at work. We don't want to take up too much space. Oh, it doesn't matter. It's just me. Stuff like that. But when we do this over and over again over time, what can happen is that we undermine our confidence in our own judgment. And when that happens, we are undermining our confidence in our own intuition. I just want people to think about that. So the self-care and the self-love in relation to what you read from my book now is about, you first have to hear yourself, honor yourself, notice the magnificent world within you, align with it, and then learn to discern what's good intuition from biases and fears and wishful thinking in order to be able to show up well. So next time when maybe to advise this, next time when people feel like they feel they know what they should do, but they don't dare to do it in the moment. They're too afraid or nervous, like in a lighter way than heavier way. Try just saying to yourself, Jason, Hrund, you've got this. Try it. I know peace negotiators who do that before they walk into a difficult conversation. You got this. Do this the way that you need to do it, in a way that you can listen to your intuition and know your needs. For example, I need 5 minutes to think about this, or let me just write this on a board, or whatever. Do what you need to do in order to share your intuition with others or consult with it. But you need to support your own confidence in your own judgment, because no one else knows what it is that your intuition is trying to tell you.
Wow. Okay. Guess what's going on a sticky note on my desk after this conversation? You've got this.
You got this. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you so much for your time. And I hope we can sit down and have another conversation at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
It's been such a pleasure.
That.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be on your wonderful podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There you have it. I want to thank Hrund for stopping by the show. We will link up to her Innsæi signature course and the book. And it's a deep topic, intuition, right? I think, as I mentioned at the top, the biggest fight that takes place within, at least for me, is that rational mind and its tendency towards practicality. And the one phrase, the one voice that I can hear that keeps coming up a lot, whether it's these exact words or some variation of them, it's not practical. You might be weighing these decisions. Oh, well, I'm going to take a year off and, travel the world, using an example that's probably a popular one in this podcast community. And then that practical mind saying it's not practical. And maybe it's not, maybe it's not the right decision for you right now in that example. But I think this podcast for me was a good reminder to give the intuitive part of you a chance to chime in, because that practical mind is always trying to drown it out. Often, I would say, at least with me. So what I want to finish this little mini rant with is this idea that maybe, just maybe, every decision isn't supposed to be practical. Maybe it's not. There are many things that we all do every day that probably aren't quote unquote practical. Playing in a band here for me isn't practical. I have 2 kids. I'm busy. I have all these projects I'm trying to launch. I got the podcast. I got all the stuff going on. Not practical to be in a band, but the music just fulfills me. It fulfills my soul. And my intuition tells me, even though the demands are sometimes challenging, I just keep going, because my intuition is like, you got to keep going with this. This is part of who you are. This is what you love. And you can't really equate that to practical things like, does it earn money, or did it prevent me from sending X amount of emails today, and all these things. So just maybe every decision isn't supposed to be practical. That's all I'm saying. I have one big announcement to make before I let you go. By the way, zerototravel.com/newsletter. If you haven't signed up for the community newsletter over there, you're going to get these announcements over there. We're doing something exciting here on the pod in the spirit of bringing you even more perspectives, ideas, resources. I have curated one incredible small group of hosts to come in and bring you new episodes. And this is what I'm calling the Zero to Travel Host Collective. I'm not sure if you are familiar with The Daily Show as a good example. They have a small group of rotating hosts that come in under the same format, but they bring a different vibe. They each bring their own unique comedic take on things. And here I have created this collective that is going to bring their unique take on travel and their unique networks, the guests that they curate. If we're doing long-form interviews, some of them are going to be episodes just recorded from those particular hosts. So right now, we have some new voices, some experienced podcast voices making high-quality new episodes for you under the Zero to Travel format. All the things you love about Zero to Travel, all of the inspiration, the practical advice, the stories, the things that leave you feeling the way you do after listening to one of these shows. I hope that's leaving you feeling good and inspired and ready to take action on something in some way, or just feeling good about the day. That's what you're going to continue to get here, but you're going to get even broader perspectives and resources from very experienced travel experts. I am so excited to announce some of these to you when they drop, and that's coming soon. So I just wanted to tease that out because you're going to be hearing some of those episodes this year, and they're coming. So I just wanted to let you know this is going to be a way to make this show even better. And I'm still going to be hosting shows as well. So some changes, but not really huge changes. But a big announcement anyway, something we're working on behind the scenes. As a community member here, I wanted to make you privy to that information. I'm super excited about what's coming your way. So I'm going to leave you with a quote to wrap this one up. And Albert Einstein, he always has the great quotes. And I think his quotes carry a lot of weight just because of his accomplishments and what he did for humanity. And he used his intuition as well. As he said in this quote, "I believe in intuitions and inspirations. I sometimes feel that I am right. I do not know that I am. That is the key. Feeling, but not knowing, and then still acting. It's a tough trick. If you can pull it off, you'll be following your intuition. So thanks for listening to this one, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.